from the blackest corners of your mind, they call, pulling you deep into shadow, twisting your senses, keeping you from sleep. It's time to face your darkest fears. This is Tales to Terrify. Good evening, children of the night, and welcome. Some flattering news to start us off this week. Tales to Terrify has been nominated for Fiction Podcast of the Year by This Is Horror. We're among some fantastic company, and it's an honor just to be recognized. That said, if you'd like to do your part in helping us cinch the prize, head over to thisishorror.co.uk and cast your vote. Not only will we be immensely grateful for your support, but you're sure to gain some brownie points with our infernal overlords, too. Plus, it's a great place to find some new reading and maybe something new to listen to as well. Again, that's thisishorror.co.uk. This week, we have 2 tales headed your way. First, a very special book requires the talents of a very special book repairman. Then, a man finds himself on the trail of his missing son, or so he thinks. Our first story for the evening comes from Thony Mintz. Thony Mintz writes speculative fiction and poetry. He's published in other places under another name. In his waking life, he teaches and spends time with his family. In his dreaming life, he's looking under rocks for the darkly sublime. Listen with me, children of the night, to Thony Mintz's Grim Prognosis, a Tales to Terrify original.
The pale young man with the backpack burst into John Chrestomathy's used bookstore, tolling the bell above the door. He marched up to old John, who put down his tea and stood, reading the situation immediately. He was silent. It was important that the client speak first. The apparition told me that the password is, and he pronounced an untranscribable phrase in Eldritch. Come along. Old John yanked hard on the pen chained to his desk, and the bookshelf for self-help flipped open to reveal a passageway. What is the patient? Old John asked as he entered and the pale young man followed. Hexen, 1608. Edition? Second. Symptoms? A cough, sneezing, gasping, and spiders. Old John looked over his shoulder. His eye was hidden by the glinting glare of the torchlight's flicker in his spectacle lens. What color are the spiders? Blue. He redoubled his pace down the passage, which opened to the repair room. Vices, hanging straps of leather, and tall vials of binding solution surrounded a table with thread and various sizes of needles, some tiny and others cruel and long. If you please, said old John as he dispensed squirts onto his hand from a container labeled Unholy Oils. The pale young man slid the backpack to the front of his body and unzipped. A mewl and a cough echoed in the repair room. Several blue spiders crawled out. The man reached in with both hands and extracted a thick, yellowed volume. The wrinkled, squinting face on the tome's cover sneezed and a deluge of new spiders burst out of its nose. The spiders parachuted around the lab on trails of web. The young man laid the book down and stood back as old John adjusted the focus on an overhead light. "The pages are all foxed. Did you line your shelves at all when you took this home?" "No." "Do you dehumidify?" "Should I?" Old John's silence cut into the pale young man. With a pair of tongs, old John opened the book, and words in Latin, Greek, and Glagolitic flowed in lines like blood cells through veins in an interwebbed semantic stream, occasionally forming eldritch runes. Anatomical illustrations of goats and ungoats throbbed, and a tassel exuded a clear substance. "This grimoire is fighting a mold infection. You may have waited too long, but I will see what I can do." Old John closed the book so that the face on the cover looked up. It sneezed, and a bigger spider drummed its legs like expectant fingers before crawling all the way out of the book's nose. He pulled out a long syringe from a drawer and filled it with one of the red solutions from a vial by the table. "Hold the grimoire down, please." The man pushed down as old John injected the solution up the bottom of the spine. The book shuddered and violently pushed against its owner's grasp. "Wait for it to calm, and you will be able to take it home once I explain how to keep it dehumidified." All of a sudden, the resistance stopped. "What does that mean?" Old John put his ear to the book's mouth. "It's in shock. I'll have to perform mouth-to-mouth and defibrillate." Old John flopped the book open to a centerfold map of hell and pulled out a mallet from under the table. He banged it right where Satan sat, straddling the page break, stewing in ice. Old John then flopped it closed and put his mouth around the withered leather lips and blew. "Come on, damn you!" The words faded, and the illustration flickered. Satan curled into himself. The pale young man stood back, hands over his mouth in fear and hope. Old John performed this operation over and over, banging harder each time. The book shook. Old John stood back. "Why did you stop?" the pale young man cried. "If it wants to pull through, it'll pull through." The grimoire let out a long breath and stilled. For a moment, it seemed like any other book. Then, slowly, the illustrations traced back into life. A flush of red, then purple, flashed in the ink of the letters. The image of Satan stirred and gave old John an obscene gesture. "It'll make it." After a handshake, some stern instructions, and payment in eldergeld, the copy of Hexen from 1608 growled and spat in the backpack as the pale young man exited, tolling the bell once more. Old John replaced the secret shelf and walked back to his desk. All the grimoires hidden among the romance novels and children's books gave him a cheer. "Hush," he said, and they went back to just being books.
That was Thony Mintz's Grim Prognosis, as read by Colin Duncan. Colin Duncan is a well-spoken man of strangely indeterminate age. He often uses archaic words and speaks of centuries past as if he had personally witnessed them. But of course that would be impossible. These days he lives in the Pacific Northwest, where he sells sustainable clothing by day and teaches martial arts by night. Thank you, Colin. Our second tale tonight comes from S.W. Pisciotta. Sam W. Pisciotta is an intrepid storyteller hurtling through space-time on the power of morning coffee and late-night tea. He writes stories for people who want to visit other planets, learn magic from birds, or talk with ghosts by moonlight. Sam is a graduate of the Odyssey writing program. Find his stories in Tales to Terrify, Asimov's F&SF, Podcastle, Nightmare Magazine, and other fine publications. You can connect with him at silo34.com, at silo34 on Instagram, and at swpisciotta on Blue Sky Social. Listen with me, children of the night, to S.W. Pisciotta's Their Words Like Leaves, a Tales to Terrify original.
Carlo stepped into the Winnemooch wilderness looking for peace, but he secretly hoped he'd find his son. Somewhere on this mountain, Ash's body lay hidden in a boulder crag or buried in a ravine beneath rotting leaves. As he hiked along the trail above Vallecito Creek, he felt like he was walking with a ghost. He wondered if the rest of his son remained here too, the parts of him that liked to read art magazines and pet other people's dogs and drink black coffee. Carlo was struggling for breath at this altitude, struggling to keep up. Teresa, his guide, pulled further ahead. They'd spoken little since leaving the trailhead that morning. She probably had second thoughts about leading a father into the same forest where his son had died. Like maybe he was so fragile, he might lie down and cry and never get up again. Or maybe she was afraid he'd run screaming through the wilderness, calling out his son's name and get lost himself. Teresa had been a search coordinator that summer, and they'd spoken on the phone. Business in Beijing, and unable to get back to the States. By the time he'd made it home, the search for Ash had been called off. He appreciated her compassion, though. She was kind and patient, and had probably undercharged him for this trip up the mountain. He paused for breath, just a moment to rest and look around. He understood why Ash had needed to come here. Standing so close to the sun, the world looked brighter. The September light skimmed the Colorado pines and drizzled like iced frosting along the trail. The earth rose on one side and dropped away on the other. Blue spruce, thick with needles, stretched into a clear sky. Between them, scattered aspen quaked their counterfeit gold. Amidst all that beautiful light, Carlo's heart ached for the son he would never see again. If only he could talk to him one more time, tell him that he loved him and never stopped thinking about him. He scanned the shadows, the heavy darkness clumped around gnarled trunks and twisted branches. He couldn't shake the sense that something hidden watched and waited. Probably just a lack of oxygen. When was the last time he'd hiked in a forest? Too long. The hike up the mountain was kicking his ass. Teresa hadn't noticed he'd stopped. He called to her, his voice scraping at the edge of desperation. His legs ached, his back hurt, and he'd essentially been lost since they'd left the trailhead at 6 a.m. Teresa stopped and turned, her face edged around the pack strapped to her back. She walked over to him. "We're not far from the meadow. There's only a couple of more hours of light left." Her words were a gentle push for him to keep moving. "I'd like to make camp before dark." "I know. I'm sorry." He bent over and slowed his breathing until the dizziness subsided. I'm not a young man anymore." He hated how weak he sounded, but they'd been hiking up the mountain all day, and at some point, all the trees and hills and ravines started to look the same. He was deep down tired in a way this young woman couldn't understand, not until life had ground her down for a couple of more decades. He wished he was back at the B&B in Durango, soaking under a hot shower. But he needed to be where Ash had been. Still was in some form, even if just a memory. He needed to hike the same trail and see the same world Ash had seen in those last hours. He needed to say goodbye to his son. A thin voice, like the call of a distant crow, spilled from the trees at the top of the embankment. Not a bird, but a human. "Dad." The voice called faint but clear, and the word distinct. He turned toward Teresa, her ear cocked in the direction of the call. Clearly, she'd heard it too. "Ash," he said. That was his voice. Teresa shook her head. "It couldn't be." "You heard it." "I don't know what I heard, but I know it wasn't him. He's been missing too long." He held his breath and waited for the voice to call again. When he looked up, Teresa was studying him with an expression of pity. He turned away to hide the wounded part of himself he'd carried ever since Ash went missing. Ridiculous. Illogical. She was right. Ash had disappeared over a year ago. Of course he couldn't still be out here. Teresa dropped her pack and leaned beside him on the rock. 10,000 feet of elevation is hard on almost everybody. She smiled at him. Honestly, even I'm feeling it today. She leaned against the embankment beside him. It can be hard up here. It was true, and not just physically. To be this close to where Ash's life had ended, the weight of it pressed relentlessly on him. Teresa let out a long breath. God, I love it up here. She turned her face into the beams of sunlight pushing through the pine. This is where I want to be when it all ends. Carlo stiffened, surprised by her mention of death in this place. Ash, he said, more of a breath than a spoken word. She turned sharply towards him. Carlo, I'm so sorry. I only meant... Don't worry about it. I'm just tired. She pulled the water bottle from her pack's mesh and took a few sips. She pointed to Carlo's bottle, urging him to drink too. Only a few inches of water sloshed at the bottom of his own bottle, but he hated to ask for more. He was fucking helpless out here. He downed what was left, and she turned and pulled another water bottle from her pack. We'll get more from the lake just up the trail, she said. She paused before handing him the bottle, obviously wanting to say something, and then she did. I'm really sorry, Carlo. I wish we had found Ash. He seemed like someone I would have liked to meet. It felt so good to have another person mention his son. No one else wanted to talk about him, his ex-wife, the people at work. Ash was everything, he said. He loved pushing himself. He loved the freedom of places like this. I'd tell him to be careful, but he wouldn't listen to me. Ever. Carlo laughed. Goddamn kid. But he hadn't really been a kid for a long time. He was a grown man who could make his own decisions, even if that meant coming out here alone. Teresa touched his arm. I'm sorry. Carlo shook his head. No, I'm sorry. I'm holding us up, and I know you want to make camp before dark. We're a long way from anywhere and anyone, Teresa said. We have to stay safe. If we need to take breaks, we're going to take breaks. Don't feel bad about it." "Ash would have liked you," Carlo said. "She was comfortable around people, easy to talk to." "You have a big family?" She nodded. "Mom and Dad, 3 brothers and a sister. We're all still in and around Durango, so we've stayed pretty tight." Carlo uncapped the new bottle of water. Ash hated being an only child. Always wanted brothers and sisters, but Christine wanted to stop at 1. Life was complicated, and Ash was always enough. And he was, until he was gone. Now Carlo was alone, with nothing to look forward to but work. No one to come home to. Just alone. She laughed. "We all drive each other crazy, though." "Still live at home?" "I do, unfortunately." She rolled her eyes. "I'm trying to get my outdoor guide business off the ground." She twisted the cap back on her bottle. "It'll happen." "You should have charged me more." Teresa glanced up, embarrassed, then looked away. "I should have found Ash." "Dad." The voice wafted on a breeze. The water bottle slipped from Carlo's hand and drained at his feet. Teresa scrambled to pick it up. "Damn, we need all we have." Carlo held up a hand to her, held his breath and listened. The call came from higher up the mountain, somewhere over the embankment. He stepped back and yelled, "Ash, I'm here." "We had over 12 feet of snow last winter. Ash isn't still wandering around out here." "I know my own son's voice. Maybe he's alive." "This isn't a rescue." Teresa shouldered her pack, her voice firmer now. "Let's keep moving." "I'm telling you." "Carlo, stop. He isn't out here." "I know what I heard." Carlo paced along the embankment. "Dad." "Ash!" Teresa hushed him and stared up into the tree line above them. "Someone might need help. Let me go and check it out." Carlo huffed a laugh. He wouldn't sit here alone. He wanted to find Ash. "Just wait here and let me scramble up top. I'll let you know what I see." Teresa shrugged off her pack. "Stay with the packs. I'll be right back." She climbed the loose earth, and the soil slipped beneath her feet. She sped up her steps, grabbing hand over hand in a crawl to the top. In a moment, she clambered over the lip and stood facing the tree line. "What do you see?" "Stay with the packs," she said again. A tickle on the wrist brought his attention to a deer tick just crawling under his sleeve cuff. Goddamn bloodsucker wanted to creep up and burrow into him. He slapped the tick off, but the skin under his collar started to itch, and every prickling suddenly felt like an infestation crawling over his body. When he looked back up for Teresa, she was gone. "Dad." "Ash. It had to be." Carlo dropped his pack and climbed the embankment, dirt and rock filling his boots. He clawed at the earth, reaching for scrub oak and embedded rock. His lungs burned for air, but he wouldn't stop. Ash might be injured and hungry. He dug in and kept moving. When he reached the top, he collapsed onto his back and gulped the thin air. His heart pounded and sweat stung his eyes. He turned over, sitting back on his heels. Scanning the forest, he shouted for Teresa. Her voice called back through the forest, distant and thin, but he couldn't make out the words. The trees and underbrush packed thicker along the ridge, obscuring his view. He got to his feet and stepped into the shadows. Ash was 26 on the day he went missing. Already 4 years graduated from university, but the image Carlo reached for wasn't the grown man he'd said goodbye to last summer, but an 8-year-old boy, waiting for his dad to put his bike chain back onto the gear sprockets. Ash had called to him, just as the wrench on the mower's bolt slipped. Carlo's knuckles slammed into the mower guard. "God damn it, Ash, just wait a minute." His son's shoulders slumped and his gaze drifted away. Carlo went into the house to wash the wound. When he came back out, Ash had abandoned his bike on the sidewalk. Carlo fixed it and wheeled it to the garage. That night, lying in bed, his reaction began to haunt him. A heavy work schedule meant he was barely home, and when he was still too busy for his wife and son. That wouldn't be the last time he'd disappointed Ash. But this would not be one of those times. The vegetation grew chaotic up here, thickets of saplings and rotting stumps, the living and the dead jumbled together. His son had called to him, needed him. Carlo climbed over fallen trunks, crisscrossing the ground, and pushed through clumps of scrub oak like lashing whips. He found what looked to be an animal trail and followed it. Dried branches clawed and scratched his face. His foot clipped a root, and the world pitched and tilted away. He hit the ground, and pain surged through his shoulder. He lay still for a moment to catch his breath and gather his senses. The acrid stench of rotten leaves, the tangled web of dark branches. He was lost, alone, no one to lean on. Night crashed closer, and the trees squeezed at the spaces between them. The cold air chilled the sweat on his back. He would never find his way out of this place, not by himself. Ash must have lived the same terror. No sunshine, no blue skies, just a world crushing inward. Voices called from the distance. Carlo groaned and pushed to his feet, staggered forward, the pain from the fall still sharp in his hands and shoulder. When he broke into the meadow, Teresa stood across the clearing, looking into a stand of aspens. He raced to her, panic clogging his throat. He needed to stand beside another human being. "Teresa," he called. She stood silent, ignoring him, gazing into the branches above her. "Did you see him?" A breeze pushed at their backs, and the aspen leaves around them began to quake, and with the golden tremor, a voice fell from the branches. "Dad." Ash, his son. Carlo spun around, looking for him, every sense reaching out to find his boy, but there wasn't anyone else around them. A gust surged through the leaves, and the tremor brought another voice flitting through the branches. This new voice didn't belong to Ash. It was a woman's voice, soft and sad. "Lost," it whispered. "Lost." Carlo moved through the aspens, searching the trunks and crooked branches for someone, something to explain the voices. A third voice, a man with a southern drawl, spoke with the tremoring leaves. "We're here." "Lost," moaned the woman's voice. "Dad." Carlo weaved through the trees. The breeze picked up, and other voices drifted down. A jumble of voices overlapping each other. "Lost. Here. See us. Rising. Growing. We. The same. Dad. Hear us. Dad. Hear us. Growing. Alive. Alive. Alive." Carlo stumbled back to Teresa, her face turned upward. Evening clouds had gathered, and a gust pushed through the trees, and the voices drifted around them with the falling leaves. "What is this?" Carlo grabbed Teresa's hand. She pulled away. I've never seen... I don't know. She walked between the trees and Carlo followed. Different voices coming from different trees, he said. But this is an aspen stand. It's a single organism. The voices continued, but not all could be understood. Spanish, maybe French, and a language that sounded older. Carlo spun and looked into the shuddering leaves. What are we hearing? Who are they? I don't know. Maybe echoes? Different people pass through here at different times. Miners, trappers, pioneers searching for a home. There was a large Ute community. The breeze subsided and the voices fluttered into silence. And Ash, said Carlo as he circled an aspen. He was here. Carlo gasped and stumbled back, almost tripping again. Bulging scars and knots in the bark stared back at him. Two gnarled eyes hollowed along a split seam, the nub of a nose where a branch might have grown but didn't, the peeled-back strip of bark yawning like a weary mouth. He motioned Teresa to his side. Do you see it? The face in the bark? Just above that dead limb. Teresa grunted. She moved to another tree and then to a third. There's another one here. Not so high. The trees revealed dozens of faces. They were all around him, knotted eyes that glistened with sap. Some mouths were thin-lipped and closed, and some gaped open in silent screams. Each face swelled from its trunk's surface, and each held a unique expression of anguish. A breeze lifted through the branches, and the voices called out again, but the faces remained stolid, trapped in the wood of the twisted trunks. Dad, Daddy, Dad? The cries came from his right, and Carlo stepped from tree to pinpoint Ash's voice. Dad. Two trunks had grown split into a V. Dad. The face protruded from the shorter tree not 6 feet above his head. It had a twisted mouth with a small slash where the chin might have been, a scar Ash had gotten jumping down from his bedroom window as a teenager. Dad. Carlo stretched his hand along the tree's trunk, grasping, straining, the distorted face just out of reach. His chest heaved. A scream cracked and split from his throat. How? Carlo struggled to get closer, to look into the dead, unblinking eyes. This wasn't his son, only a perversion, a trick of nature. He wrapped his legs around the tree to push himself up, but the bark was too smooth, and he slipped. He wedged between the split trees and pushed with his legs, reaching toward the face in the trunk. Carlo, stop! Teresa reached up to steady him. He paused, his legs straining to hold him between the two trees. The leaves quaked. Stop! 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 The air around them filled with a feverish buzz, a sharp, angry sound rising on the wind and passing through the aspen stand. It was the sound of wasps swarming, but there weren't any insects in the air. Carlo froze, his legs trembling. Mountain jays swooped down with flashes of blue and landed on the branches around him. The aspen stand filled with their squawks, and the insect hum intensified. 2 jays flew at Carlo's head, and one of them struck his ear. The sky tilted backward. He pivoted, and his leg bent beneath him as he hit the ground. His knee snapped as his leg twisted beneath his body. He screamed. Teresa knelt at his side to shield him. The insect buzz faded, and within a moment, the blue jays flitted away. They departed as suddenly as they'd arrived. Carlo tried to move, but pain shot through his leg. "Fuck!" He screamed again as Teresa rolled him to straighten his leg from under his body. "Lie still for a moment." She lightly touched his knee through the pant leg. "It's swelling. It might be a break. Hopefully just twisted. Maybe a sprain." "Feels like a ligament," he moaned. "Don't press on it, please." Teresa leaned back and scanned the trees around them. What the fuck was that? She looked back at Carlo, fear in her eyes. "I think the trees just mimicked the sound of wasps to call the birds." "What is this place?" Carlo tried to keep from moving into more pain. "I have to know that isn't ash up there." "We need to get you off this mountain." Teresa looked worried. "But I can't carry you." "I'm not going anywhere until I know what the hell is going on here." She wasn't listening. "My family will know when I don't come back. They know the trail we went on. They'll come for us." "Why is my son's voice coming from that tree?" "I don't know. The voices, the faces. I don't want to stay here." "Well, I can't move, and it's getting dark." They would have to stay, at least for a while. They couldn't just leave Ash behind. He needed time to think. Teresa stood up, and panic surged through Carlo. She was leaving him. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to get my pack. The one I told you to stay with. Remember?" Her sarcasm stung. He lay back and grimaced with the pain. "Listen," she said. "I have a medical kit there, matches, tools. I need to wrap your leg. Maybe I can build a stretcher to drag you. At least get you away from these fucking trees." "You're leaving me?" The leaves quaked and the shriek of a wounded animal drifted down from them. "What is that?" "Sounds like a wounded elk," Teresa said. "A cry for help." She placed a hand on Carlo's shoulder. "The trail isn't far. I'll be right back, I promise." "Don't leave me here." She stood and started back through the trees, but paused when the leaves mimicked the elk's sickening cry through the forest around them. A twig snapped in the gloom. She froze and turned. A shadow crept around a clump of scrub with a low growl, and bile rose in Carlo's throat. A mountain lion stepped into the aspen stand and moved in an arc around Teresa. She waved her arms above her head and yelled to scare the lion away. The leaves bellowed their pitiful cry. Teresa stepped back and tripped, hitting her head on a tree trunk. The lion sprang and seized her shoulder, clamping down as it held her to the ground with its clawed paws. She thrashed and kicked. The mountain lion released, then clamped its teeth on her skull. She gurgled through her blood, and her kicks and flails grew weaker until they ebbed into a weak leg spasm. Her sobs mingled with the lion's growl. Carlo shouted and waved his arm to scare away the lion. The lion paused and looked up, its raspy growl a warning. A cold, mechanical sound clicked from the trees. A gun cocking. The lion tensed, and then the trees mimicked several loud explosions of a gun firing. The lion bolted from the aspen stand. Pain shot through Carlo's knee as he twisted to watch the mountain lion escape into the pines. Teresa whimpered, her hands twitching at her side. Blood poured from her wounds. Carlo pulled himself toward her and used his coat to staunch the bleeding. She sobbed when he applied pressure to her torn flesh. He pushed more firmly when blood squirted around the coat. She reached up and grabbed his hands. His knee twisted in pain. Somehow, He would have to get to the packs and get the medical kit. Fuck his leg. Once he stopped the bleeding, he would head back to the trail. The voices from the leaves called to him. He did his best to ignore them, focused instead on Teresa. Ash wasn't here. Not the boy he'd raised. Not the man who had come to hike this mountain last summer. Whatever this was, it wasn't his son. After sunset, the growls returned. In the dark, Carrillo couldn't tell if it was the actual mountain lion stalking them or the trees mimicking the lion. He pulled himself closer to Teresa, shielding her while he held the coat to her wounds. Exhausted and cold, he closed his eyes. Light flared behind his eyelids. He'd fallen asleep and now woke to a new morning, the horizon edged with sunlight. He reached for Teresa, and a sharp pain shot through his leg. He grunted through the throbbing. The coat lay on the ground over Teresa's head. He shifted around, pulled it away, and recoiled from her body. She lay face down and bent at the waist, her legs spread out along the ground. She looked like she'd bent to peer into a deep hole within the earth. Her head and shoulders lay buried at the tree's base. No, no, no. This couldn't be happening. He stilled his nerves and scooted beside her, clawing at the earth and trying to excavate her from the soil. Dirt shoved under his nails and bits of rock and twig stabbed his fingers. He ignored the pain and dug. He pulled at her shoulders, but her body held tight. He dug deeper into the dark, wet earth. Then his fingers reached it. A thick root across her neck held her body in place. The soil was steeped in blood. His hands were red with it. Along the base of the aspen's trunk, 2 deep knots, glistening with sap, peered back at him. Teresa. The leaves quaked and the voices filled with loss rained down on him. Ash was there too. He could hear him calling. Carrillo lowered his head to the earth, unable to stop the tears, his entire body racked with sobs. A low growl from the scrub oak shook the air. Carrillo reached down and grasped the root, held it tightly, and braced for the attack. The voices in the leaves shifted into a chorus. They were no longer talking over one another. They had rhythm and pitch, qualities he hadn't heard the day before. Perhaps he'd been too frightened to notice, but the trees were no longer jabbering or pleading or merely mimicking. The loneliness and fear he'd heard were gone. It was beautiful. This morning, the trees were singing, and their lyrics lilted with a quivering harmony. Their words, like leaves, fell to the ground with the promise of renewal. These voices weren't filled with isolation and despair, but rather with the joy of belonging. There was no more fight in him. He missed Ash so damn much. Carrillo exhaled and let the song wash over him. He gazed up into the faces staring down at him. A community of one. This aspen stand wasn't a collection of separate trees, but one living, breathing organism. Each tree was connected to the others, and the whole was connected to the world around it. They weren't lost at all. It was Carrillo who had been lost. So alone, with no one to come home to, no one to talk to, no one to share his day with. Life shouldn't be like that. Life was meant to be shared. To be part of a community was everything. The leaves above him quaked their song, and it was an invitation to join them. Ready to take communion, he relaxed into the moist earth and closed his eyes.
That was S.W. Pisciotta's Their Words Like Leaves, as read by Charles Conover. Charles Conover is a retired business professional who enjoys telling many types of stories. He's presented in front of corporate VPs and read stories to his children and grandchildren. Charles has been a creative storyteller all his life, from stick figure comic books, taped radio plays, to writing short stories. Thank you, Charles. Well, children of the night, the hour is late and we've run out of tales to tell. For now. Tales to Terrify is made possible by the tremendous generosity of our supporters on Patreon and PayPal. Incredible fans like Lestle Baxter, Amanda Carrillo, Amanda Gottfried, and Orion D. Hegre, whose generous support keeps these lights on and flickering ominously. If you're not a supporter, head over to patreon.com/Tales to Terrify. You'll find all kinds of perks, like ad-free episodes, bonus content, and one-of-a-kind collectibles. Every dollar goes back into this show, and we appreciate your support so much. Want another way to support the show that doesn't cost you a cent? Head over to Podchaser, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and drop us a 5-star review. You'll not only put an unnaturally wide smile on our faces, but help new listeners discover our terrifying tales, too. You can show your love of the show out in the world with some Tales to Terrify merch. TalesToTerrify.com/merch will take you to our TeePublic store, where we've got a great collection of creepy custom and curated designs. Tales to Terrify is produced by Seth Williams, Meredith Morgenstern, Andrew Gibson, Crystal Hammond, Spencer Disparty, and myself, Drew Sebastini, with original theme by Nebulous Entertainment. Tales to Terrify is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Join us again next week as we feed the darkness with more Tales to Terrify.